Energy is who you are. Energy is how we change our life.
We have to realize that understanding energy is how we can fundamentally change ourselves from the inside out, and understand that one shift, one perspective, one decision away, literally one decision away from a different life, from a different truth, from a different way of living. This is for the soul-led leaders, the awakened ones, the revolutionaries, the visionaries, the change makers, the light workers, the empaths, the true awakened ones. This is our story. Are you ready? Welcome to Awaken and Manifest Your Best Life with Ashley from theawakened.net. It's time to wake up to who you truly are. Welcome to the podcast. It's time for the activation. And remember, the universe is inside of you and you hold the power to design your life. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the very first episode of Awaken and Manifest Your Best Life. Holy cow, guys. We are officially here. We are doing the damn thing. So, on this episode, I really wanted to talk a lot about the mission behind the awakened state as it's evolved. And I also really want to talk about why I decided to create this podcast. So, if you've been following me around the block or two, I've been really diving heavily into YouTube. And one thing I began to notice is sometimes I just want to binge on a podcast, but I don't necessarily want to binge on a YouTube. And so I decided that what we're going to do here is this channel is going to be a combination of new episodes and old episodes from YouTube, and also along with some surprises along the way. And most importantly, it's going to be really about let's geek out, have fun, and really dive deep into these topics on manifestation, energy work, Kundalini awakening, chakras, healing, energy healing, mind-body work, really diving into all of these amazing topics that can truly transform your life. So the reason why I love podcasts so much is one of my favorite things to do is I would have like my self-care ritual. And what I would do is every Sunday I would have like my hot bath. And then what I'd do is I'd like, which podcast do I want to listen to today to really feed my mind with this like inspiring, empowering, motivational content so I'm like ready for my week. And then I began to think about how so much of like what inspires me is making sure I'm feeding my mind the right information. And so what I've created here is what I want to do with this podcast is really kind of give you that soul injection, that soul unleashed, intuitive channeling, massively empowering inspiration for your week. And so my goal here on this new podcast experience is to give you that dose of inspiration, that moment of personal empowerment. Because what I find is it's not so much about making sure I'm like heavily positive, but I do find that when I give myself like soul food, like I give myself that element of personal inspiration, personal empowerment, whatever gets me into that right headspace, that can just drastically shift my entire week for myself. And so what I'd do is I'd have like my crystals and I would have this beautiful self-care ritual. And then I would hit play on one of my most inspiring podcasts. And it just would feel so good because I feel like I'd be giving my soul exactly what it needs to stay rooted into a space of personal alignment. I mean, have you ever felt that way where sometimes like it's not so much where you're spending your time, it's what you're feeding with your mind and where you're essentially giving your time to and your energy to is where you're currently planted in. And I find that when I allow myself to take time out of my day, out of my week, to set the pace for how my week goes, to allow my energy to fully drop in and plant in, I'm way more naturally aligned, intuitive, receptive to information. I'm more brought into that space of full clarity, full resolution. And because of that experience, I find myself so much more inspired, empowered, and I'm out of my head. And I think one thing that's so empowering that we can do for ourselves is to get out of the overthinking mind, to get out of that space where we're overthinking a situation, we're heavily analyzing, we're analytical, we're super in our high beta wave frequency, and we're just so overwhelmed and in that space of overthinking that we've kind of lost absolute sight with our soul truth and our natural alignment. And I see this so much in the industry where we can often find ourselves trying to force alignment, where we're trying to force ourselves to be positive. We're trying to force ourselves to be in a particular state or a particular emotional state. And that's the complete opposite of what alignment is. So when we give ourselves that permission slip to allow ourselves to drop into soul, to allow that intuitive hit, to allow that space of what is known as super flow, where we're allowing ourselves to drop into this ultimate flow state, we're really kind of bridging the gap between being super analytical, overly in our heads, overthinking, over strategizing, thinking we have a to-do list to get into alignment. All of these concepts are just stop, just pause and drop in. And I think this is a discipline. This is a weekly choice that we make for ourselves where you have to be am I willing to allow the drop fully into soul? And when I get into that space, I think there's just something that's so empowering when you allow yourself to just discipline your mind to be relentless in your soul alignment and to allow that space in your mind where you can just detach from the noise so you can hear yourself again. Because when you hear yourself again, the road becomes clearer. The fog begins to lift. And it's oh, I was on the path the entire time, but I wasn't seeing the path because I was way over here, trying to track down something. But all I needed to do was come back to the present moment, pause, and allow myself to be in that space of pure beingness, to allow the magic, to allow the intuitive wisdom, to allow the right channelings, to allow that right message to come forth and come through. And I think when we get so caught up in our heads and we think we have to write a college paper essay, instead of just simply being out in the field, being in it to win it, being in the space, we're kind of cutting off so much magic that wouldn't necessarily be there if we were just allowing ourselves to be well, what do I need to do to get aligned? What do I need to do to be positive today? What do I need to do to force myself into a higher vibrational state so I can enter a state of alignment? I find that is really the hard path. When you are caught up in that loop of, shit, I didn't meditate today. Oh, shit, I didn't do that visualization. And it's you're caught up in the hamster wheel of thinking that your spiritual practice is a chore. You're forgetting that the spiritual practice is you embodying life and working with your natural intuitive magic. And so as we go into this space on this podcast, I want you to remember that this is the soul food. This is your soul injection back to alignment. To remember that when you get out of your own way and stop the overthinking, you can drop into soul and be given the way forward. To get out of the way that you're trying to make and instead be given the way that your soul already knows. the answers, the solutions, the right healing, the right beliefs, the right thoughts, the right actions. And I think that's the space where real magic occurs. Okay, so I just wanted to clear that up because, it's like, well, why are we starting a podcast? And it's just like, I love allowing that space of intuition and pure channeling. And then I was just like, actually, the podcast is a perfect vehicle for that because we can use it as a tool to really allow that drop into soul. Half the time, I might not even know what I'm going to, I don't have a bullet point list of what I'm going to say to you, but I know that the message will be heard, the message will be seen, and what I need to tell you will be shown to me and guided through me. And I think, why don't we just freaking get it like that? Like, you are the vessel, you are the portal, you are the person who already knows the answer, but you're too busy way over there when you actually just need to be the vessel, be the channel, and the work is the cure. The channeling is the cure. And so when we get out of the way, we allow ourselves to fully drop into that. And because of being in that space of pure certainty, pure clarity, that's when we actually drop into flow in pure alignment. And then we become an energetic match. It's not from this elaborate process. And I think we can often cut ourselves off from so much intuitive magic when we don't allow ourselves to go there. So, this is Awaken and Manifest Your Best Life, the podcast experience. Holy shit, guys. We are here. So, what I want to talk about is the awakened state and how, it originally started off as a Tumblr blog. Not a lot of people know this, but I was doing Q&A work for free on Tumblr just because I was really determined to make sure that people could understand how they could use chakras and energy work and all of these things in their life. And what I began to notice is that there were so many false teachings out there that weren't even talking about how to actually practically use energy tools and energy wisdom and all of these concepts. And there was so much falsehood when we go into this process of spiritual awakening. And so the awakened state as a concept really started out because I was just so fed up with all of the false information out there that I really wanted to bring that sense of pure channeling truth into others' lives who were confused and lost on the awakening path and who were completely overwhelmed by the process, that they didn't know what was going on with them. They felt crazy. They felt out of body. They felt confused and dissociated. And I just totally remember being there and understanding that and wanting to help. And that's the core reason why I created the awakened state. Because as I experienced my own spiritual awakening, I seriously wish I had all of this information that I give others now, because it helped me so much to understand what was going on and to stop veering into these traps of, these channelings about galactic warriors and what was it, the Galactic Federation of Light and all of these things where it's just none of that was helpful to me. What was helpful to me was understanding how to systematically get what was going on in my body, in my nervous system, how I could understand it, how I could navigate through it, how I could navigate through change, how I could navigate through understanding resistance. And this kind of became my lifeblood for understanding that Kundalini awakening is so much more than just this concept that is thrown around in New Age circles. It is literally the evolution of consciousness itself. And that's like the core root of what Kundalini awakening is. It's the evolution of consciousness. And the more that we start to see it that way, we can start to take away these frou-frou terms that leave us so confused and conflicted and overwhelmed, and like we're in some like weird foreign paradigm of like an intergalactic movie. And instead we can start to bring more of that practical element into understanding who we are as a core concept of our authentic selves. And so I think what really occurred for me is I began to notice that the awakened state really began to morph into something so much more about how to understand the workings of navigating change in the body and how we can use Kundalini awakening to essentially heal ourselves from the inside out. So as the awakened state has grown, a big core part of the mission at the awakened state has been about bridging the gap between our spiritual identity and our physical self, and to understand that we are bridging the gap between the spiritual self and the physical self. And you know, when we first awaken, maybe there was this point in time where it's just like we just felt that we were only seeing the physical world and what it was. But then we began to open our eyes to so many more questions and paradigms and perspectives of how reality is truly built and made. And whether that at first was a terrifying experience or a completely beautiful, liberating one, we begin to see that there's so much more to reality than just what is physically solid matter. And we begin to see that through that awareness, we are starting to merge the gap between who we are and energetically knowing that we live in a field of limitless possibilities and probabilities of consciousness and expansion of self. And I think awakening shows us so beautifully how we can bridge the gap between what was once just our physical self and our material self and what we see as physical, dense, solid matter. And instead we see that we're so much more than just a physical body, and we start to see the energetics at play, and that we are actually more energy than we are physical matter. And because of that systematic foundation of just knowing that we are bridging the gap, it's not that the spiritual self is disconnected from the physical self, and it's not that the spiritual self is like waiting to ascend in a distant, far off future where the aliens are going to come save us. It's nothing like that at all. And instead you start to realize that you are the person that is creating the gap and starting to essentially dissolve the gap. And I think when we look at spiritual awakening from this lens of you're dissolving the gap between the spiritual self and the material self, you start to realize that you've been naturally suppressing that part of yourself. And I believe like spiritual awakening is where everything starts to come online. And that's how like, you know, manifestation, energy work, all of these things start to come in play, because now you're realizing that you're so much more than just living on this racetrack, and instead you begin to see that you're the one that is creating it. And you start to see that the energy is the missing piece, because the energetic side of you is so much more expansive and limitless and empowered, and most of all in a state of flow, in alignment. And because we start to see that we're more than just a physical human, we start to learn that maybe there was a part of us that naturally suppressed our natural intuition. We suppressed our natural intuitive capabilities, our sense of our psychic abilities, that sense of clairaudience or clairvoyance, and those senses that were basically dimmed out or turned down, but they've always existed. And so one thing I love that we talked about in my latest workshop, Ascension, was we talked a lot about how it's important to see that as you go through a spiritual awakening, you start to essentially turn on all of these different systems in your mind that weren't actually there before. but they were there. Your soul knew they were there, but you were unconsciously aware of them. So it's like you were unaware that they existed, but your soul knew they existed. And so what happens during Kundalini awakening is we start to activate all of these, like, almost what you could call them codes or whatever. But I like to say it's more like higher faculties in the mind that you're turning on and accessing. And what I begin to notice is, like, it's almost like a lot of society lives more in like a high beta, very stressful, very turned down state of consciousness where we don't have access to those more intuitive capabilities that exist inside of us. But the reality is they're always there. They've been there since before birth. They're part of who you are as your natural energetic state of consciousness. So that intuitive part of you naturally exists inside of you. But as you're basically going through a spiritual awakening, you may have realized that those influences of your intuition were naturally suppressed, dimmed out, maybe even shunned, or you thought you were, that it was evil, or you were crazy, or any of these things where maybe it was religion or the sense of all of these beliefs thrown to you that, that like these things are too woo-woo and too out there or evil, or any of those things where you naturally kind of suppressed that part of you and didn't make it natural, make it normal, make it real. And what happens is once we go through that Kundalini awakening, we're in this space in our mind where now that stuff is starting to turn on. And a lot of us might not know how to deal with that. We might not know how. It's been dormant so long in our nervous system that now we're just like walking around like a newborn, approaching a new different world. And all of these intuitive, hypersensitive abilities start coming online and we don't understand how to navigate them. It's like we're in a space where we have training wheels on and we have no clue how to drive the car. I guess I'm mixing up my analogies, but you get the point. It's like we're in this space where we've suppressed that part of ourselves that is naturally intuitive, that's naturally magnetic, and in that space where we don't even fully know who we are yet, we start activating all of this hidden potential that we didn't even know existed, but our soul knew, and our soul already knew the way. But as we start to awaken that part of ourselves, we naturally open up all of these channels in our mind. And what occurs is now we have the ascension symptoms to deal with. Now we all of a sudden have all of this new psychic abilities starting to come online, and we're freaking out that we're suddenly seeing energy, or we're feeling energy, or we're claustrophobic, or we're overly in a state of overactive empathy, or maybe we feel that it's hard to control our energy. Or maybe we're in this space where it's like we have almost like this timeline collapsing feeling where it's like we're shifting in and out of things, and we have deja vu show up and all of this numerology show up. And all of these things start to bombard our consciousness. And because of that, it's like the suppression is basically blowing up. And it's like, how do we navigate this? What do we do next? What is going on? Like, the journey of the awakened state has always been about, well, how do we navigate change in the sense of merging the spiritual self and the physical self, and how we can understand that we are actually one. We are actually in a point of awareness where these things are actually normal. They've been there since birth. We do not need to suppress them. And as a result, we can learn to properly understand them so we can not only heal ourselves from the inside out, but we can also co-create our reality from the inside out. And so a lot of my work has been shifting around from energetic healing to manifestation for this very reason, because you can start to see how you can use your intuitive capabilities, your natural intuitive gifts that are inside of you, you can learn that as you're no longer suppressing them, you start to understand them, that they're a skill you can build and create and morph and use to your personal advantage. So the more that I began to expand my awareness of this and understand my intuitive capabilities, I began to utilize them to my personal advantage to essentially learn about quantum intelligence and channelings and how you can use this part of yourself to better your life. And so the awakening happens because all of that suppression is no longer allowed to stay dormant. And then all of a sudden we're bombarded with all of this stimuli and we have no way to properly navigate it because it's been laying dormant. And because of that, now all of a sudden we're hypersensitive to all of this information. We're hypersensitive to who we are. And we're trying to figure out all these new concepts and these new perceptions of reality. And it can feel terrifying yet beautiful. And it can feel exhilarating but empowering. And because of that, we can be naturally afraid of our own power and our own potential and our own light. And because of that drastic shift in the mind occurring, what naturally happens is we are afraid to let go. We're afraid to let go of change, so which bombards us with so much resistance in the mind. So it's like life is kind of like an onion. And once we understand Kundalini awakening, it's like we start peeling back the layers of that onion, and now we start to get to the core root of what reality is. It's energetic. And so we start to see that there's different layers to energetic reality. There's different dimensions of consciousness. There's different states of who we are. There's different perceptions of reality. And the more we start to peel back the layers of who we are, we begin to remove that old conditioning. We start to remove the old patterns, the old habits, the toxic behaviors. And what inevitably occurs is our mind and our body start drastically moving more and more and more into who we naturally, authentically are. The person that empowers themselves from the inside out with their intuitive capabilities. They start to utilize their intuitive power and strengthen their intuition. They start to use their natural magnetism, which is occurring from their intuition, and they start to systematically change themselves from the inside out. And so the Awaken State's core mission is about learning to understand that part of ourselves that is more intuitive, that is more naturally in a space where magnetism is real, where we can learn to manifest from the inside out through understanding our natural intuitive capabilities of who we are. And we can also learn to heal ourselves from that natural space of intuition. So when you think about the awakening path as a whole, like there's so much fluff out there. But the way I see it is awakening is really about really getting clear on who you are beyond all the programming you've been fed, beyond all the external influence that you keep bombarding your consciousness with. What I began to really notice is it begins to go back to what I originally said, like that full circle moment. What are you energetically planted into? What are you feeding with your mind? What are you giving your energy towards? Because the inner creates the outer. The reality is everything is a mirror and everything's being influenced by the mirror. And so you have to realize that if you are the portal and you are the channel, and it's about understanding that what you give your power to has power over you, you start to take away the conversation of the external world is influencing the internal world, and instead you realize that the internal world is actually what's really influencing the external reality. So our mission here at the Awaken State has always been about really helping you understand how you can understand the patterns that are looping in your nervous system that maybe you've been struggling with healing. Maybe you've been struggling with understanding your intuitive gifts, your intuitive nature of who you are. And instead, we can learn to understand these patterns that are looping in our nervous system. We can understand how we can change them. And most importantly, we can understand how to emotionally empower ourselves from the inside out through essentially stop going into the space of being externally influenced, and instead we can start changing the internal environment. And the more that we understand that we are the ones who change the world from the inside out, the more we begin to see that we are all in this together. No one is excluded. No one is left behind. This conversation is about seeing that we are all rising as a collective conscious. And the more we begin to understand that the rising of consciousness is a collective revolution, it is not one hierarchy over another hierarchy. It is occurring simultaneously because we are ascending now as a collective. So the faster that you begin to understand like your personal sense of alignment, like who you are, your authentic self, your higher self, your highest potential, you start to tap into that part of you that is naturally intuitive, and you begin to learn how to navigate that part of you. And so the easiest way to understand that is, I believe, connecting into our energetic roots, who we are at our core. If you want to change anything in life, it begins with understanding your energy. When I first was understanding how energy works, I began to easily see that it all came back to the chakras, but it wasn't the chakras as a concept. It was understanding the energetic relationship to the chakras. It was understanding the energy behind the entire concept of reality. And I think we can often get so confused, bogged down, and misled by all of this external influence and noise. And it's almost like an unconscious brainwashing where we're not fully aware that what we're planting into has power over us. And so one of the things that I always teach in energy management, in my energy management toolkit, is you have to remember that energy is radiating outward. It's not radiating inward. So the more you realize that you are essentially like a light bulb, and the energy is expanding outward into reality. It's not expanding inward, it's expanding outward. And so you are like an energetic radio or a transmitter of giving and receiving information. But you have to realize, well, what am I feeding into my light bulb, basically? What am I feeding into my radio? What am I giving into my energetic conversation of reality? And so when we look at how to understand ourselves from the inside out, we have to also look at, what am I feeding into my reality? What am I planting myself into? Okay, so this has been so much fun. One thing I also want to talk about really quick is I want to explore how we can understand that when it comes to Kundalini awakening, I personally believe that healing and manifesting are kind of an interconnected conversation. So when it comes to Kundalini awakening, it's important to see that manifestation is just the other side of healing. And I think this is just one of the coolest concepts like I've really understood with the chakras is in the chakras, and there's the healing current and then there's the manifestation current. And the healing current is what most of us are completely familiar with. Kundalini ascension, Kundalini awakening, and the rising of our consciousness, the rising of our essential, like our vibrations. And so the rising of the chakras basically is the healing current. We experience that Kundalini awakening, that Kundalini ascension, because our energy is cleaning up the chakras, so to speak, from our old programming, the old habits, the old emotions, essentially your old identity of who you are. Now, on the other spectrum, the more that you're working on that healing current, you're actually also working with the manifestation current, because the manifestation current is saying, well, this is actually what you believe about this area of your life. And so, for example, when we have like an issue going on in the solar plexus chakra, it's going to influence how we show up for our purpose, our sense of value, our sense of worth, and our sense of our personal sense of identity, our career, who we are as a person. All of that will be influenced in that solar plexus center. And like I said, it's not about the chakra necessarily, it's about the energy behind it. And so we start to see that the manifestation current will change the moment that we change the energy behind that chakra, because it's an interconnected conversation where you're either in the healing current or you're in the manifestation current. And when we're in the healing current, we attract essentially what we need to heal to move forward. We attract what we need to do to fully let go. And in the manifestation current, we attract from a totally different energy of our natural magnetism. And I find that so empowering to know, because the moment that you decide in your mind that you can fully get that this is like a real concept of how we process information, you start to see that healing and manifesting are two highly different conversations that we're creating with reality. And we hold the power to change them by understanding the energy that is creating them. Like, how fucking mind-blowing is that? To understand that energy is how we literally change our life from the inside out by looking at those patterns and looking at our sense of our habits and our thoughts and our beliefs, and most importantly, our emotions and how our emotions are behaving in relationship to those patterns. And all of that is connected to how we may be experiencing those ascension symptoms, or how we may be understanding that our intuitive gifts are starting to come online. All of that is interconnected together, and it goes back to those core foundational concepts of you're in the healing current or you're in the manifestation current. Well, how do I know that? Well, when you think about the mind and how the mind works, when we are in the healing current, we're in past and future thinking. So this is so cool. So when you think about the healing current, we're healing our past. So you're in the past and the future thinking. And because of that, when we're in the past identity, we cannot create something new because we are only creating from the past evidence. So the healing current operates highly differently because it can only recreate the past to heal the past. The manifestation current works highly different. The manifestation current works in the present moment. It works through alignment. And because of this, it works through creating in the now a new experience. It operates outside of time, which means it operates in the quantum. It operates in a sense of you being in your own intuitive, natural magnetism and capabilities of who you are. Because of this, when we start to see this, we can see that when we're in a pattern that needs healed, one of the best things we can do is start to understand that pattern so we can get on the manifestation current to change it. And so at the awakened state, one of the hugest things we've been really kind of talking a ton about has been how we can change the conversation from energy healing to manifestation, because they are literally an interconnected system to heal and manifest from the inside out. So when it comes to creating change in the mind, it is always about learning how to change yourself from the inside out. Okay, so this has been so fun. I feel like the message has been served. There has been so much to dig into. I highly, highly, highly would recommend if you wouldn't mind giving me a review so we can get this podcast out there. That'd be awesome. And stay tuned. Hey guys, Ashley here. Thank you for joining me in another episode of the Awaken and Manifest Your Best Life podcast. This is going to be the space for manifesting tips, energy tips, spiritual awakening advice, and all things receiving that kick your ass soul injection back to your personal alignment. I do have a free gift for you if you're ready to be a VIP and receive exclusive access to our Awaken library, packed full of guidebooks, audios, meditations, workbooks, quizzes, and tons of goodies for yours truly. You can get that all at library.theawakenedstate.net. Head to library.theawakenedstate.net. So enjoy that, and remember, you always are more than enough because the universe is inside of you and you hold the power to design your life.